Your money, your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome, everybody. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com, the gold standard in talk radio. We are taking your calls live, 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-4-SCHIFF. In case I forget, I will be doing CNBC Fast Money almost immediately following the end of this program. I think around 12:15 Eastern Time is my scheduled hit time. So if you want to tune in at the end of the show, go into CNBC. I apologize for not being on the nightly business report. I think a couple of shows ago I mentioned that I was taping that. They ended up canceling it last minute. They said they wanted to go with a more local commentator, so I ended up not doing that segment. I was going to be talking about the Herman Cain 999 plan. But you never know. With television, sometimes they book you, they last minute cancel you. So a lot of times I'm going to err on mentioning the fact that I'm going to be on just in case they don't cancel me, because I know there are people out there that like to try to tune in or set their recording devices if they know that I'm going to be on. Also, it is my plan. I am going to be in Manhattan later on today, and in my schedule today, I have a visit, I think around 4:30 in the afternoon, to the Occupy Wall Street. I don't know if it's an encampment or wherever the bulk of the occupiers are making their camp. I'm going to be heading down there. I think we've got a camera crew, and it might even be streaming live on the Internet. So if you Google Peter Schiff, you might find the site that might be streaming my encounter with the protesters live. My point of going down there is really to ask a lot of questions and maybe give some answers that they're not getting from typical sources. I am very sympathetic with the grievances. I think a lot of the people who are protesting have a right to protest. The economy really is screwed up, and yet we've really given our young people the short end of the stick here in America by putting them through the government school system, graduating them through college with many cases degrees of dubious value, little marketable skills, loading them up with debt, and then graduating into a comatose job market where even if they get a job, by the time they finish paying Social Security taxes, income taxes, and then take their student loan payments, they really have nothing left. So they have a right to be upset, but they're upset at the wrong thing. They're upset at capitalism, and they should be upset about the government. Remember when George Bush, uttered, I don't know if it's a famous phrase or not, infamous, but remember when George Bush said we have to abandon capitalism to save it? Well, the problem was we had abandoned it years ago. That's why we had a crisis. It was because we had already abandoned capitalism. Yes, capitalism getting the blame for what the government has done, but we had abandoned it quite some time ago. The truth is, what George Bush needed to do was embrace capitalism. Capitalism was the only thing that would save the economy from the damage that government had inflicted upon it. But instead of going back to capitalism, we just went further down the path of socialism or corporatism, statism. And that's why the country is in so much trouble. And I'm reading a lot of articles about how people are starting to feel that capitalism's very existence is now in question because of the failures of the economy to deliver opportunity and prosperity to so many people. And in many ways, they are right that the idea of capitalism is being threatened because of how much capitalism has been corrupted by the governments. And it's going to be a real shame if the final nail in the capitalist coffin, is ultimately hammered in because of so much damage that the government does to the economy in the name of capitalism. And it is very, very risky what is going to develop on the other side of this. Because if the protesters think they have it bad now, wait till they see how much worse it is if we adopt their solutions. If we get the government to do the things that they want. What the Occupy Wall Street protesters have to understand that if they really want prosperity, if they really want a bright future in America, if they really want jobs, it's capitalism that is going to bring it to them, not more government. Every revolution that has put its faith in government has failed. Where we've had success is where we've had a revolution against government in favor of freedom. The revolutions that dismantle government and allow freedom to flourish, those are the revolutions that deliver real prosperity to the revolutionaries. But history is full of situations where the people revolted and embraced bigger government, that they demanded more from their governments. They wanted equality. They wanted redistribution of the wealth. And every time you've had those kinds of revolutions, what do you get? The Soviet Union, China, Cuba, there's no end to this, and it doesn't end well. So I'm going to go down there. I have no idea what to expect. I don't know how I'm going to be received. I don't know, maybe Captain Midnight will be down there to protect me just in case I need a superhero. I don't know if it's going to turn violent at all when the 99% is confronted with the 1%, because I think I've got a sign that we're going to bring just to let people know that I represent the 1%, and I'm willing to talk. I don't know that I'm going to bring a white flag and actually surrender to their mercy. I want to stand up for the rights of the 1%. And in fact, it's capitalism that disproportionately benefits the 99%. The top echelons of society generally fares well. Even under the communist systems, there was always a small percentage of people, generally people that were very well connected to the government. They lived pretty good. They got all the things they needed. They had access to the black markets. They could shop in the hard currency stores. So the elite of the Communist Party, they still do okay. It's the vast majority of the middle class, or I don't even know if you want to call it a middle class. I guess you just get the 1% who is rich and the 99% who are impoverished. But the systems that help the masses the most is capitalism, is freedom, is when you allow, entrepreneurship, when you allow investment and risk taking and all that. That's when you help everybody in the 99%. And of course, what enables people in the 99% to join and maybe expand it to 2% or 3%, that upward mobility comes from capitalism. Where you're not stuck in the station of life into which you're born, that your future is not determined by who your father is and who they know, but your own ability, your own skills and drive and ambition and hard work. If you want to see people moving up the social structure and achieve wealth and prosperity, that only happens in a free capitalistic economy. It doesn't happen in a command economy. Anyway, we will be back. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show. To President Obama, Secretary Geithner, Madam Pelosi, and all of the socialist econ professors across America, we're sorry. We're sorry. Peter Schiff is back on the air.
This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. We're taking calls live, 855-4-SCHIFF, 855-4-SCHIFF. The lines are open now for anybody who wants to call in. We got a lot of news coming out this morning, a lot of economic data, although also on a political front, we're getting news out of Libya. Libyan officials are confirming the death of Muammar Gaddafi, who died apparently earlier today in a raid or an ambush. I'm not sure all the details, but Al Jazeera, I'm reading, is claiming to have had footage of the body of Colonel Gaddafi. I don't know that the U.S. has confirmed on its own independently that Gaddafi is dead, but there are a lot of photographs coming up of a lot of people rejoicing at the death of Muammar Gaddafi. But anyway, back to home, talking about some of the economic data that came out. First of all, earlier this morning, we got the weekly jobs claims, and the claims were down slightly, but still 403,000 new claims for the week ending October 15th. Every week pretty much you have 400,000 claims. And these types of high numbers are not indicative of an economic recovery. They're far more indicative of the types of numbers that you would see during a recession. But the world still thinks, the analysts still think that we are recovering. We did get some leading economic indicators that are out today that are supposedly pointing to economic growth, but, they're barely positive. I think the index came out at a 0.3. It was 0.2 last month. But, again, a lot of these economic indicators, in my mind, are bogus. I think if you really want to know what the economy is doing, you don't need to look at a lot of these statistics. You just kind of need to open your eyes and look at what's actually happening and look at the policies that we know the Fed is pursuing and that we know Congress is pursuing, and that these policies are inconsistent with a genuine economic recovery. Also, we've got more data on the housing market out today. Home resales on the last month dropped by 3%, despite record low mortgage interest rates. The interest rates did tick down to new record lows as a result of the launching of Operation Twist, even though the yields on the 10-year and 30-year bonds have now surrendered all of those gains. I do think that mortgage rates are still a little bit lower, maybe a quarter point or so, lower than they were before Operation Twist. Probably the mortgage rates are probably going to head back up, given what we're looking at in the Treasury market. But even though we had record low mortgage rates, it's still harder to sell a house. So imagine how much more difficult it would be to sell houses if we didn't have record low mortgage interest rates, because eventually we won't. Eventually interest rates are going to have to rise, and when they do, it's going to be much more difficult for people to buy these homes. And I think, too, also I mentioned yesterday that we had this big increase in construction. All that construction was in multifamily dwellings because people don't want to buy these houses. But I think even there we're going to eventually see weakness in the apartment complex, because what's going to happen is a lot of these houses that are now vacant and unoccupied, that are not really on the rental market because people are still hoping to sell them, or they're tied up in the foreclosure process, so they're really kind of in limbo. They haven't been foreclosed on yet. Maybe the people are still living there and not making their mortgage payments. But I think a lot of these units are going to come on the rental market, and that is going to put the kibosh on some of the demand for new rental construction when you get a lot more rentals coming on the market. And, of course, if you combine that with the destruction of housing demand, as more people take roommates, as more people, more younger people move back with their parents because they can't get jobs after graduating from college, as elderly people move in with their grown children because, hey, they can't survive anymore with 0% interest rates and the rising cost of living. So I think a lot of people are going to be living with each other. Hey, a lot of families might start renting out rooms, taking in boarders to help pay expenses. So I think as Americans, ratchet down their living standards and start seeing multiple families occupying the same residence, that's going to put even more pressure on that rental market, which might be the only bright spot in the cost of living. As the price of everything goes up, we might see some rent prices going down. But don't think that means that housing costs are going to go down, because if you want to heat your rental unit, if you want to air condition it, that's going to cost a lot more. So it's not going to be good news. Anyway, before I try to go to the phones, I wanted to play another one of these clips. This, again, is the class warfare. This time, Democrat Chuck Schumer, who is wanting to beat up the rich and blame the rich for our problems, and they're greedy and they don't want to share with everybody else. Listen to what he had to say. This is cut number 9.
The only thing standing in the way between us and this worthy legislation is a small handful of very, very, very wealthy people. Not all wealthy people, because as Joe Biden said, I believe most people who make over $1 million know this is the right thing to do. But it's a small number who are very greedy. Their view is, I made all my money all by myself. How dare your government put its fingers on any of that money? And they unfortunately control, on issues like this, the Republican side of the aisle in the United States Senate. That's the problem.
All right, so, yes, these greedy millionaires claim that they made all their money by themselves, and how dare the government touch any of it? What do you mean touch any of it? They've already touched a good chunk of it. People that are making a lot of money running businesses, right, which is what he's talking about, they've already given about half of what they've earned to the government already. So what do you mean that the government can't touch any of it? They've already taken an enormous portion of what business people have earned. And, in fact, business people today, not only did they make it on their own, which, of course, they did. I mean, what Schumer is trying to imply is that they didn't really make it on their own, that it was somehow the government that helped them. It's actually the reverse. Businesses today succeed despite everything the government does to prevent them from succeeding. It's the government that is erecting all sorts of barriers that entrepreneurs need to overcome. I mean, and for some, it's insurmountable. I think there are a lot of businesses that would have succeeded, that would have hired people, but went bankrupt simply because they couldn't afford government. They couldn't afford the regulations. They couldn't afford the taxes and the time that it took when business people are trying to run a business, yet they're distracted by the need to comply with all these cumbersome rules and regulations. It's hard to remain focused. It's hard to keep your eye on the ball. So Schumer is 100% wrong. Not only did people who make it on their own with no help from government, they made it on their own despite all the things the government was doing to screw them up, to make it harder. And then when they did manage to overcome all the government-created obstacles, the government still was there to take their half of the profits, even though had the entrepreneur lost money, the government wasn't going to absorb any of the losses. No. You know, if the entrepreneur loses, it's all on him. He's got to pay for the losses. But, hey, if the entrepreneur succeeds, the government is already there with its handout demanding its cut. And its cut is very big. And apparently Chuck Schumer thinks that making that cut even bigger is what's going to create jobs. And, of course, the legislation he's talking about is the president's jobs bill. And, of course, not only are more affluent taxpayers opposed to it because they already are taxed enough, they understand that sending more money to the government is not going to create the jobs that Chuck Schumer thinks this proposal is going to create. People actually oppose this proposal because they know it will destroy jobs. It's bad for the economy. That's the truth. Anyway, we're running out of time for this segment. We will be back. I've got a guest, CEO of Kaplan, Andrew Rosen, coming up after the break, so stick around. We'll be right back. You're listening to The Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show.
To the dark, dark sea comes the only world.
We now return to The Peter Schiff Show.
Call in now, 855-4-SCHIFF.
That's 855-472-4433.
Rebel Radio.
The Peter Schiff Show.
This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. Joining the program now is Andrew Rosen, who is the CEO of Kaplan, Inc., which is one of the world's largest and most diverse educational organizations. He's also the author of the just-released book, Change.ed, or Change.edu, Rebooting for the New Talent Economy. Andrew, welcome to the Peter Schiff Show.
Thank you, Peter. Good to be here.
Well, thanks for coming on. First of all, let my audience know a little bit more about what Kaplan does. I mean, I remember Kaplan from when I was younger, where they did a lot of prep courses for, the SATs or the GMATs or the LSATs. But beyond that, I mean, what else does Kaplan get involved in?
Well, that's right. We're the largest and best-known test preparation company around the world. But we also have, our larger businesses are in higher education. So we offer colleges where students get their associate's, bachelor's, and master's degrees in the United States and, as I say, around the world. About a quarter of Kaplan is based outside the United States.
Yeah. Now, are these degrees given? Do you take the course at home on the internet, or are there actually classrooms where people are attending?
Yeah, we have 75 campuses in the United States and about 15 more overseas where students come. But the majority of our students are actually taking their entire program online.
And how long does it take to complete the degree?
Well, it's comparable to what people are used to. So it would take about 2 years to get an associate's degree and 4 years to get a bachelor's degree. But students are typically attending year-round, so they're not taking the whole summer off, but they're taking a bit lighter course load because most of them are in school, working at the same time that they're in school.
Now, are they graded on the material? Is it just, are there exams and GPAs and things like that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, most students who come to us say that they find it at least as difficult or more difficult than the traditional colleges that many of them have attended before they came to Kaplan, because they've got to show a level of discipline, particularly for an online program that they don't need.
How do you proctor the exams? Do people have to come to a test center to take the exams? Because if you're taking it from your own home on your computer, isn't it kind of easy to cheat?
Well, for obviously for our campuses, they come directly to the campuses, but online they submit papers and exams. And the thing you have to understand about online education is you get to know the student. That is, you get to understand their capabilities, their strengths, their weaknesses, and when students perform at a level that's different from the expectation, it's pretty easy to identify whether there's a problem there. So there's all sorts of mechanisms that you have, including local proctors and so on, for high stakes exams. But on everyday quizzes, you're actually able to maintain quite a close watch on how students are performing.
Mm-hmm. Now, what does this program cost? A degree? If I was going to get a degree from one of your universities online, what is the typical cost going to run me?
It costs about $12,000 a year. That's the overall cost of the program. So you'd be able to get your associate's degree for about $24,000 and your bachelor's degree for about twice that.
So that's still about $50,000. It doesn't sound like it's that much of a bargain. I mean, it's still a lot of money, $50,000 for a degree. Are your students, are they paying for this out of pocket, or are they using government loans to pay the tuition?
The bulk of them are accessing government loans. For comparison purposes, obviously at many of our country's universities, they cost about $50,000 a year. The whole degree would be about $50,000. But there are less expensive approaches. If somebody wants to get go to a community college, for example, which is heavily subsidized by the taxpayer through direct contributions from the government, they can get a degree less expensively for them. That degree is still more expensive to deliver. That is more of the burden is borne by the taxpayer and less by the student. In terms of the overall cost of education, private sector education is pretty demonstrably the lowest cost alternative out there.
Oh, I would definitely agree with that. I'm sure you have studies, rather. How do your graduates fare in the job market versus the graduate of a more typical of college program?
Well, it's a great question, and let me start off by saying that students of the demographic that comes to our school, there's typically an older student, a lower income student. Students with a comparable demographic are twice as likely to graduate from Kaplan University or many other what I call private sector institutions than comparable students are in the rest of American education. That is, most of American higher education serves a very narrow segment of the population, the 18 to 24-year-old who's supported by their parents and comes out of a good high school. But those who need education to improve in their careers are not the focus of our education system, but they are the focus of ours. And those students don't do very well in the traditional system. They graduate at very low rates, and because our programs are built around the adult student and the student who's trying to make his or her way in a career, students are much more likely to graduate. Then,
so what you're saying is more, instead of like a lot of times, a lot of kids, they graduate high school, they don't really know what they want to do, but they're all just kind of cattle herded into a college degree because they're told if they don't get this degree, their life's a complete failure. So they go to college, they don't really know what they want to do, and maybe they don't get a lot out of it. But you're saying a lot of your students are the people that didn't come directly from high school, but once they're in the job market and kind of know what they need and what they want, they get a degree from you in a field that they know is going to improve their skills towards the career that they want to pursue.
That's exactly right. So students, a lot of kids come out of high school. Maybe they take a little bit of college, but they find it's not for them, or they just don't click with the institution or they get a job right out of high school. They think that everything is great, but then 10 years later, at this point they've got a kid, one or two kids, and the kids want sneakers and so on and so forth, and they say, you know what, this $12 an hour job that I've got is not enough. I need to do something more. And besides that, I want to be a role model for my kids. I want to, when I'm talking with them and saying you got to do your homework, I want to be able to show that I've stepped up.
Yeah, also I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that if you're already in the workforce and then you decide to attend college to advance your degree while you're working, I think you can deduct the cost of the education from your income, but that's something you can't do if you just go straight to college and then get a job.
Before you have any income, that's right.
But they won't let you deduct it. But if you're working for a particular company and they say, hey, you can't get a promotion to this new level unless you get a degree, if you go back and get that degree, I think you can deduct the cost of attaining it from the income that you get.
Right. If it's for a particular purpose like the one you're describing, that's right.
Yeah.
But, students, who are older are much more practical in what they're looking for from a college education. They're not looking for, climbing walls and football games and a date for Saturday night. What they want are a set of skills that can advance them in their careers. And that's what we're built around.
And I think that's something, too, you point out in your book, that a lot of these universities now are becoming, club meds, more like educational institutions. It's all about these big sports facilities and gymnasiums and, just a social experience. And, no one really cares how much it costs because, of course, everybody is going on student loans or their parents' money, and it's just one big party. But unfortunately, there's a giant bill at the end of it.
I've spent over my career a lot of time on college campuses, and I have to say I'm a little jealous. I'd kind of like to go back myself because it is so much fun that the universities are building for kids, because they've realized there's not that much more. Most universities, or many universities, can spend on the education. They have good faculty, they have good facilities, they've got nice, well-stocked labs. The way to attract new students and better students and increase the prestige of a university is to turn your campus into a resort, a place where there are wonderful gyms and fancy dining halls with French bistros and sushi bars and so on. All kinds of things that are designed to make the experience fun. Well, that's great, but it's really driving up the cost of higher ed, and the taxpayer is footing the bill for a lot of it. And frankly, the taxpayer doesn't care if a student goes to Georgetown or George Washington or George Mason. That student's going to get a good education regardless. Yet we're funding all of those institutions to compete with each other on things that have nothing to do with education.
Yeah, and I also think, perversely, it's so much fun to be in school that the kids don't want to have to bog down their fun time with studying, and so that might be one of the reasons that they gravitate towards the less challenging majors. So they don't major in engineering or physics or computer science or something like that. They take an easy liberal arts major so it doesn't interfere with all their partying.
Well, that's right. In fact, I talk in Change.edu about studies that say the average student only spends about 2.9 hours per day on school-related educational activities. That's, 3 hours out of 24. That leaves a lot of time for fun. And yet, they're spending up to $50,000 a year, or at least their parents or the taxpayers are spending that kind of money. And but it's really about a resort experience, and that seems like a pretty fundamental misallocation of resources.
Yeah, and of course, all of this, and I want to get into this more after this break, but all of this is the result of government interference. If there was not all this free money, taxpayer money, subsidized money, college kids would not have the money for $50,000 a year for a resort experience. Colleges would be under pressure to cut all this crap out, to bring the cost down so that the kids could actually afford to get the education they need, not the social experience that they want. Anyway, we're going to be back and talk about student aid, particularly what's going on with student aid into private for-profit colleges when we get back. You're listening to the Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show. Since the Peter Schiff Show was last on the air, the national debt added another $7.89 million.
Luckily, Peter's intelligence is growing twice as fast.
That's incredible.
Welcome back to your source of sanity in an insane world. It's the Peter Schiff Show.
This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. On the line with me now is Andrew Rosen, CEO of Kaplan Inc. and the author of the new book, Change.edu, Rebooting for the New Talent Economy. And, Andrew, before the break, I started to mention student loans. And I read that I think this year, for the first year ever, U.S. students are going to borrow over $100 billion in a single year. Student debt now tops $1 trillion U.S. dollars. In fact, one of the gripes of the protesters and the Occupy Wall Street movement is the fact that they're all drowning in debt and they're looking for debt forgiveness. Now, I've been in favor of complete elimination of all government loans, either direct or guaranteed, for higher education. Apparently, though, I think Congress is doing something that is even worse than eliminating all of it, or worse than just keeping it all. I think they're threatening to eliminate the loans just for the for-profit institutions, the private for-profit colleges like Kaplan, yet preserving it for the most inefficient universities, which will probably even funnel more people away from more efficient programs like yours into the more expensive programs like the ones that you described.
Well, it's almost right. What they're doing is heavily regulating the for-profit sector with a set of regs that only apply to for-profit institutions. And my own view is that to the extent you're trying to protect the taxpayer or students, you should be applying rules to the entire higher education sector, not just.
All right, so what are the rules then that they want to apply to Kaplan universities, for example, but not to the more traditional universities?
Well, for example, there's a rule that actually serves as a price floor, surprisingly enough, for for-profit institutions. It's a fairly complicated rule that has to do with what percent of your revenue can come from the Title IV programs, called the 90-10 rule. But what it leads to is a situation where the for-profit schools are not competing for the most part on price. That is, what the government ought to be doing is unleashing price competition, forcing all of us to fight it out on qualitative and price grounds. And instead, what they've done is created a price floor so that that for-profit institutions can't go below, and that to me makes no sense. But beyond
so,
that,
it makes sense to me, because what the government is trying to do is shelter the traditional universities from price competition, potentially from private universities. So what they're trying to do is trying to maintain the escalating cost of college education by trying to limit the ability of universities to compete on price, and they'd rather have them compete on fancy gymnasiums.
Well, you're exactly right on that point. I mean, the biggest supporters of this so-called 90-10 rule are the community colleges and state colleges.
Yeah, and of course, that's all businesses want that. If they can get the government to come in and eliminate competition based on price, all the better, because nobody wants to compete. Everybody wants to charge as much as possible. Now, in a free market, you can't do that because of competition unless the government comes in and rigs the game, which is what they're doing in education.
That's right. I mean, it just seems to me that the best role for the government is to ensure transparency and information so that students know what in fact they're getting and how much it's going to cost and what the likely outcomes are, and to ensure that all institutions are operating on a level playing field. And then you let the institutions fight it out. And you know, one of the good things about the American higher education funding system is that it is competitive. That is, students get to choose where they're going to take their Title IV funding. Title IV is the government student loan program. And institutions that don't provide an appropriate value or a good value proposition for students won't survive, and those who provide a good value proposition will.
How do you think your university would fare if we got the government out of the college financing business altogether and you simply were selling your services to students who could afford to pay cash or who had either through working their way through your program or could borrow money somehow in the private sector or maybe even directly from your universities? If you're so confident in the value of your degrees, you can do your own financing program. But if there was no government help, how do you think your university would fare, assuming you're on equal footing because there's no government loans for anybody?
Yeah, see, if there was no government funding across the board, then you've got really unsustainable structures in much of American higher ed, and so you'd really be rebuilding the entire marketplace from scratch. And on that basis, I feel pretty good about how we would thrive because what we focus our investment on is the actual education that students are getting, the learning outcomes that they receive, and we do a lot. I mean, one of the things that's surprising about higher education is there's very little data and very little analysis. So, we go through a whole process in which we make sure that if we assess the learning outcomes of each student in each program through a standardized process in which we can determine at the end of each term, do we have a problem with an individual professor that we need to work with? Do we have a problem with a specific group of students such that we can remediate their problems from maybe several terms in advance so that by the time they get to a certain class, they'll be okay? Or do we have a problem with our curriculum? And, it's sort of the basic analytic tools that we use to make sure that our students are learning that companies across America and around the world use in their business all the time.
Yeah, often it's the for-profit universities get a bad rap because everybody says, hey, they're just in it to make a buck, whereas these non-for-profit universities really care about education. The thing is, just because they're not for profit doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of people working in those universities who are profiting quite handsomely under this nonprofit model. You have very big salaries and benefits that are lavished on the hierarchy in these universities and professors. There's a lot of profit being made at these nonprofit universities. Well,
look, if you the most profitable universities by far are the nonprofits. If you just take Harvard's $30 billion endowment, by definition, what the endowment is the excess of revenue over expenses, whether through contributions or tuition payments. So that means Harvard has been profitable by a $30 billion figure over the years. There is no for-profit, defined as for-profit company that's anywhere remotely close. Nor will they, by the way, because on our profits we pay 40% tax. So, the nonprofits are hugely profitable but not paying taxes. The for-profits.
Yeah, that's a great point. Anyway, we are out of time. Good luck with your book. Good luck with what you're doing over there at Kaplan. We need more innovation in education, and I'm sure in the future we are going to get it. Anyway, hey, that's it for this first hour of the show. Stick around. We've got another hour coming up of the Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com. We'll be right back.
The Peter Schiff Show.
You make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on Earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on.
Call in now. 855-4SHIFT.
That's 855-472-4433.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories,
your freedom.
The Peter Schiff Show.
This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. Hour 2 is underway now. If you want to call, we've got an open board. The number is 855-4SHIFT, 855-4SCHIFF if you want to call and join the program. Anyway, I want to get back again to more of the sound clips from some of our leaders. Here is Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid speaking yesterday, trying to make the false claim that the public sector or the private sector is doing fine, and the problem is the government workers are having a hard time, and so we need more programs to create more government jobs and more stimulus for government. I mean, can you believe this guy? Here, listen to cut number 5.
The massive layoffs we've had in America today have, of course, are rooted in the last administration, and it's very clear that private sector jobs have been doing just fine. It's the public sector jobs where we've lost huge numbers, and that's what this legislation is all about. And it's unfortunate, my friend, the Republican leader, is complaining about that.
Now, so didn't I just read yesterday that the wealthiest community, the wealthiest metropolitan region in the country is now Washington, D.C. It has overcome San Jose, California, which included Silicon Valley. So what is he talking about? The government workers are having a party at the expense of the private sector. As a matter of fact, since the recession began in September of 2007, here's the statistics. The private sector has lost 6.25 million jobs, and the government sector, the federal government, has added 63,000 jobs. So the federal workforce is increased by 2.3%. The private sector workforce down by 6.25%. I'm not sure exactly how the public sector workforce has fared. I don't have the numbers. Maybe I'll get them for state and local government workers. But clearly, the federal government workers are not suffering at all. In fact, there has been significant pay increases among federal government employees. That is one of the reasons that Washington, D.C. is now so wealthy. It's because so many government workers have received enormous pay increases during the Obama administration. So while the private sector is getting their pay cut, right, where people are losing jobs and getting lower paying jobs or not getting raises, you're seeing these big pay increases in Washington. And, of course, the lobbyists that surround Washington are making even more money because there's more government perks to lobby for. Or in some cases, with the Obama administration, you've got all of these companies who have won waivers from Obamacare. How much do you have to spend to a lobbyist? How much do you have to pay a lobbyist to lobby your case in front of the president to get a waiver from his own program? So in a way, it's kind of like your traditional mafia protection money where Obama threatens to shake you down unless you cough up some money. And if you pay enough money to some of his friends, then he'll leave you be. So as there's more to fear and more power concentrated in Washington, there is more neat reason to lobby. So the lobbyists are making more money. The lawyers are making more money. The government employees are making more money. And the private sector is suffering. And Harry Reid's got the nerve to say that the private sector is doing fine. They're not doing fine. It's the private sector that's getting stuck with a bill for the government party that's been going on for too long. Anyway, also during the break, I was listening on CNBC where they were referencing an op-ed in today's Wall Street Journal that I had a chance to skim through during the break. And this is an op-ed on how to clean up the housing mess written by Alan Blinder, famous economist. And, of course, Alan Blinder is not among the people who saw the housing bubble in advance. He was kind of blind, pun intended, to what was going on, and now he claims that he can see a solution. And if you read through his piece, the solutions all emanate from government and things that government can do. And a lot of the problems that he's pointing out to in the foreclosure problem, it's because the government is not letting the free market function. If we adopted a free market solution, which of course doesn't even seem an option to Alan Blinder, but if we adopted a free market solution, we would clean up this housing mess. Now, one of the things he says is that we need forgiveness, mortgage forgiveness, and he thinks that there will be political opposition, and of course there would be, to simply lowering the principal of the loans. So if somebody borrowed $400,000 to buy a house, and now the house is only worth $200,000, that we should just officially, as taxpayers, forgive maybe $250,000 of the mortgage, so that the taxpayer now has equity again in his house, or the homeowner has equity, and the lender would be made whole, and the taxpayer would get the bill. Nobody is going to want to sign on to that. Remember, a lot of people who have big home mortgages have these big home mortgages because they took vacations, because they bought cars, because they put in swimming pools, because they remodeled their kitchens or their bathrooms. Why should they get all this stuff at the taxpayer's expense? Why should the guy who didn't do that, who didn't leverage up his property, who didn't put in a swimming pool, buy a swimming pool for his neighbor who took on all this debt? But he's right about one thing. We're not going to solve the problem until we get principal reduction. But I don't want it to happen through the government, through the taxpayer. I want it to happen through a free market, through the banking system. Because what would happen if the government just simply backed out of the way? A lot of the people who are in over their heads would simply get out of their houses. They would move. And faced with the threat of a owner leaving and sticking a bank with a mortgage, the banks would be under pressure on their own to try to remove or write down the principal of these mortgages. But they would do so in a much fairer manner that was more consistent with the real ability of the homeowner and the financial resources of that homeowner. And also, they would first consider their alternatives, because obviously, if they can sell the property to somebody who would give them more money, then they would do that. And of course, the new buyer of the property, who was not underwater in the property, would be able to maintain it and would be able to rent it out and provide relief. Maybe he would be able to rent it out to the very homeowner that's living there now with no equity and who is not doing anything to maintain the property because he can't afford it. If instead he rented it from somebody who could afford it, everybody would be better off. And there are solutions, but the real reason Alan Blinder thinks this problem is there because the government hasn't done enough. The problems persist because the government continues to do too much. Anyway, we'll be right back. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show. Since the Peter Schiff Show was last on the air, the national debt added another $7.89 million.
Luckily, Peter's intelligence is growing twice as fast.
That's incredible.
Welcome back to your source of sanity in an insane world. It's the Peter Schiff Show.
And we are back. This is Peter Schiff here at SchiffRadio.com. We still have open phone lines. In fact, I don't think we've had any calls yet today. So if you want to call 855-4SCHIFF, 855-4SCHIFF, maybe somebody has some ideas on any questions or something they might want me to ask the Occupy Wall Street protesters while I'm down there. Maybe give me a call. I got an email from my brother, Andrew, who also I think is going to be calling at some point during the show. He had a topic he wanted to discuss, but he sent me an email. I guess he did some quick Googling on Harvard tuitions. And back in 1900, annual tuition to Harvard was $150 a year. I think he did some quick calculations, and that equates to about $3,000 a year in today's money. Harvard tuition now is about $35,000, so it's 12 times. In real terms, adjusted for inflation, the cost of a Harvard degree is 12 times as high as it was in 1900. Now, does anybody think that the education is 12 times better than it was in 1900? I mean, did people actually graduate Harvard 12 times better educated, 12 times more prepared for adult life or employment than they did at the turn of the 19th century? Does anybody really think that? In fact, I would be willing to bet that the typical Harvard graduate in 1900, if you can give them an exam, on a number of subjects, obviously, it can't include anything that happened after 1900, but if you tested him on things that happened before, general things in English, math, or geography, history of that period, I bet that they're brighter. I bet that they would score higher than today's grads. Even though Harvard is certainly a fine university, I can imagine how fine it was in 1900. And in fact, probably if you were able to measure the increase in lifetime earnings of a Harvard grad in 1900 relative to non-Harvard grads, the extra income that they can expect to earn throughout their lifetime as a result of buying a Harvard degree, and you compare it to the extra income earned by today's Harvard grads, I would guess that the impact was greater back then. So that would mean that not only is a Harvard tuition 12 times as expensive as it was over 100 years ago, but the degree itself is less valuable. So you pay more money to have a degree that offers less real value. And I say that, and that's Harvard. That's the best college. Imagine at some of the the colleges that aren't quite top tier. There, I think people are really getting ripped off. And again, that is one of the big protest points down at Occupy Wall Street. Is a lot of frustrated college grads with a lot of debt and no job or good prospects to pay that debt back, or let alone make a decent living for themselves. Anyway, we do have someone on the line. Mason is on hold from Sonoma, California. Mason, welcome to the show.
Hey, yeah, Peter. Hey, I was calling because I was wondering, where would a libertarian, what would they say as far as national parks? Does the government need to be involved in running the national parks, Yosemite, Yellowstone, that sort of thing?
Well, to the extent that the government does run them, I think they should pay for them through fees from the people who visit. There should be, an entrance fee, or they can sell concessions to, food and beverage operators, to the stores that sell souvenirs. I think the government should have to pay for it through user fees. It should, why should the federal government tax some poor kid in the inner city to pay for some yuppie to visit Yosemite? That shouldn't be the case. So if the government is going to operate these national parks at all, they should be operated through user fees. But, in some cases, look, the parks can be sold and private operators can be there. But, I don't have a big exemption to certain lands being owned by the government. But I do think that they should be paid for by the people who actually enjoy and use the national parks, not by people who have never seen those parks and probably will never see them in their lives.
Yeah, well, I mean, to get into Yosemite, it's $20. I mean, that's fine for the people that are going to use it, but I think it's ridiculous that a taxpayer should have to drive up there and pay an additional $20 after he's just been ripped off 50% of his paycheck.
Well, most of your paycheck isn't going to fund Yosemite. Probably I would be willing to get that the $20 isn't enough to really bear the cost of what it is. I would want to separate it. I wouldn't want any of the taxpayer money going to the parks. I would want the user fees, and maybe that means they got to up the price of a ticket to Yosemite. I don't know. I don't really know what the economics are, but we really need to. But you're paying a lot of taxes. it's not necessarily all going to those parks. A lot of the taxes that you're paying are for people's Social Security benefits or welfare benefits or for the military. So I'd like to dramatically reduce your taxes so that you had more money to buy a ticket to Yosemite, even if it means that the ticket price has to go up. But I have no idea what the real economics are to operate that park and how much those ticket prices need to be.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Peter.
Yeah, but I always think that user fees are a way to pay for things. If the government is going to build a road, you can have a toll road. And especially today, it's a lot easier to collect tolls with these easy passes. It doesn't create traffic. You just zip through, and you can be billed automatically for using those roads. That way, the government service, the cost of it is borne by those that benefit from it, whereas people who don't use those services at all aren't subsidizing the people who do. Anyway, Brian is on hold calling from Washington State. Brian, welcome to the show.
Hey, Peter. Good morning. I'm wrestling with a part of Ron Paul's platform that I'm not sure that I agree with, which is the idea of states' rights and strict constitutionalism. My problem with it is the idea that state governments should be able to do anything that the federal government can't, like, say, administering public education. If the purpose of government is to uphold individual rights, then shouldn't the federal government uphold them everywhere in its jurisdiction? For example, if we agree that abortion is a right, should Roe versus Wade stand so that state governments cannot violate abortion rights, or should it be repealed just because the Constitution may not give the federal government the power to intervene?
Well, we have to understand that the Constitution, as it's written, applies very differently to the states than it does to the federal government. The Constitution was written by the states to limit the power of the federal government. There are some limitations placed on the states, but the principle of the 10th Amendment is that any powers that are not expressly given to the federal government does not have. But any powers that the state governments are not denied, well, they still have. And there, what you have to do is look further to your individual state constitution, because all the states have their own constitutions that impose additional limits on what those state governments can do. And I think what Ron Paul is saying on a lot of issues is, look, the federal government has no business being in this area. Ron Paul is running for president. And so he can say, look, if you want government involvement in education, there is no constitutionally authorized role for the federal government in education. Now, that doesn't mean that individual states can't check their own state constitutions and decide what they want to do. Maybe Ron Paul would prefer that the state governments not get involved either. But as president, that's not his business. It's up to the states to decide their own role. And the thing is, if a state chooses that it wants to fund college educations in its state, it can do it, and it would have more money to do it if the federal government stopped doing it. And the key is, the closer to the problem the government is involved in, the less inefficient it's going to be. So it is better for the state, let's say a state of Maine, if Maine wants to spend money on education, it's better for Maine to spend the money itself rather than send it to Washington first and then have it come back through Washington, D.C. to be spent on education in Maine. And, of course, that would apply within the state. It's better if a town or a city spends the money for its, in its own town or city rather than having the money go to its capital and then trickle back down to the individual towns.
Ignoring the system that we have now, would you be in favor of one national government that strictly upheld perfectly individual rights everywhere, or 50 different jurisdictions that...
No, individual rights are still there, right? There are many of the Bill of Rights, that applies to the states. So the states can't deprive you of property without due process of law. They can't deprive you of freedom of speech or any of these things. But there are some things that that state governments can use taxes for and use tax revenues for that are inappropriate for the federal government. And there are ways that the states can levy taxes constitutionally that the federal government cannot. Anyway, that's the point. We are running out of time for this segment. Now we got a full board of calls. So we'll be back. We have another full half hour coming up on the Peter Schiff Show here at SchiffRadio.com.
Peter Schiff Show.
We now return to the Peter Schiff Show.
Call in now, 855-4-SCHIFF.
That's 855-472-4433.
Rebel Radio, the Peter Schiff Show.
According to the Reverend, it's easy to create jobs. Well, where do they come from? How does Washington create jobs? And if they can create jobs, then why don't they just create jobs for everybody? Right? Why is there ever any unemployment? If the government can simply create jobs out of thin air, the way it creates money out of thin air, then what's the problem? You know, the person that lives in the parallel universe is the Reverend Al Sharpton. He lives in a fantasy land of his own creation where the government has magic powers and it could just create jobs. Now, I will agree that the government can create jobs. Anyway, sorry about that. We are back. This is Peter Schiff, and I'm trying to take some calls here. On the phone now is Robert calling from San Jose, California. Robert, you're on.
Hey, Peter. Good morning. How are you?
Good.
Good. Thanks for taking my call. Something you said last week caught my attention. You were talking about how really it's government to blame for making so much money available to people, or maybe you're blaming the Federal Reserve, and you're basically saying, you can't blame people for wanting to take that money. The blame should be put with the Fed for making it available.
Oh yeah, whenever the government is giving away money, I mean, I could say I could be opposed to unemployment compensation as in principle, but then if I lost my job, I'm not going to refuse to take my unemployment benefits. It doesn't do any good. If the government doesn't give the money to me, they're going to give it to somebody else. So if government is handing money out, people are going to be expected to want to get their share of the handout. After all, they're paying taxes, and if they don't take the money, somebody else will. I don't blame a Wall Street firm that was about to fail from accepting a government bailout. I mean, why wouldn't they? I mean, I would do the same thing if my firm was failing and the government offered to bail it out. I'm not going to turn it down. But the thing is, I shouldn't even have that opportunity. The government shouldn't be giving away money in the first place, because of course the people are going to take it. But the problem is, what about the people that don't get bailed out? The people that don't get the offer, they get stuck with the bill, and they have no choice in the matter. Because if the government asked me, hey, Peter Schiff, we're going to bail out, Goldman Sachs. This is what it's going to cost. Here's your share. Do you want to pay? Of course, I would have said no. I don't, give my share to somebody else. But they don't do that. So they give the person who's getting the bailout, he gets a choice. He could get bailed out, but the people who are paying for it, they get no choice.
So I was curious where you thought how morality plays into a free market. For example, that's part of what you're saying makes me think, some guy, let's say, made himself physically available to your wife, and she chose to, let's say, sleep with him and have sex with him. Would you blame the guy for making himself available to your wife, or would you blame your wife for, choosing?
Well, I don't know that that's really the example that you could say is a fair way to do it, because obviously if my wife turns down the offer, it's not that she's going to end up sleeping with somebody else anyway. My point is that if the government offers you money and you turn it down, somebody else is going to get it. So it's not, this happened to my dad. I remember one time my dad was opposed to benefits for, there was a bill that was going to give a bunch of money to veterans. And my father was opposed to it but he was a veteran. And anyway, the bill passed. And I remember my father was asked, well, are you going to turn down your benefit? Well, what's the point of turning it down? It's already passed. it's not going to do any good for me to just on principle refuse my share. I was opposed to everybody getting it, but now that they're giving it out, my taxes are there. I might as well get my share of it. So there are some politicians like Ron Paul on principle, I think refuses his congressional pension. I think he's also refused some other perks. But I don't blame people who are opposed to government programs, but then take advantage of their share of those programs because, if they don't do it, it's not going to end the program. It just means that they get a little offset. You're paying all these taxes. The government is taking all your money. You should take any opportunity you can to get some of it back.
But if everyone were to, let's say, take the moral high ground and refuse, these benefits that they really shouldn't have been given in the first place.
But that's never going to happen. That's just not how it works. I mean, you got the classic prisoner's dilemma. Nobody is going to do that. Because if I assumed that everybody else was going to turn down the benefits, well, what's the harm in me of taking mine? After all, I'm only one person. So if everybody else turns it down, hey, it's great. I'll just take my benefit. It's a spit in the ocean. It helps me a lot, but nobody will notice it because it's just me. Or if I feel the other way, well, I'm not going to be the only one to not take the benefit. After all, everybody else is probably going to take it. So screw it. I'm going to take mine too. No matter what you think everybody else is going to do, the best thing for you to do is take the benefit. So, of course, everybody ends up taking the benefit, and that's what happens. The only solution is to not offer it in the first place. Don't give people that option. That's what we need to do.
But in Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments, Adam Smith was a moral philosopher, and he always considered his theory of moral sentiments to be his most important work. And, in that, he seems to lay a foundation, a sort of a moral foundation in which he thinks his Wealth of Nations theory is going to be taking place. So I imagine he believed that morality had some role to play in a free market society, and I was curious, what you thought about, Adam Smith's take on, his theory of moral sentiments.
I'm a big fan of Adam Smith, but you've already gone past morality when you're talking about how to divvy up stolen money, because that's what's going on. And the thing is, if you don't take your cut of the stolen money, they're not going to return it to the people who it was stolen from. They're simply going to give it to somebody else. So morality has already gone out the window when you're dealing with this issue in the first place. But anyway, hey, thank you for the phone call. Next up is Dan calling from Vail, Colorado. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Peter. I was calling because you raised the issue of what we'd like to ask Occupy Wall Street people. And I wanted to make you aware, if you didn't know already, an article on Infowars.com that's titled State Department Agitator Advising Occupy Movement. Apparently, Ahmad Mayer, who led in the Egypt Arab Spring, is being funded by the State Department, and he's involved. That's also linked to a Wired News source in that article. So it appears that the movement is being steered by the State Department.
That's an interesting take. I had heard somewhere that apparently the Occupy Wall Street protesters have a bank account now with a few $100,000 in it. I wonder where the donations came from. I don't remember seeing any appeals for donations among the Occupy Wall Street protesters, but apparently they are being funded, which means the occupation lives on. We'll see how long they're going to be there. I think when the weather turns cold, it's going to be difficult for some of the people to be sleeping in tents out there in the middle of Manhattan.
Yeah, it sure will. But I just want to make sure that everyone's aware. It may not be just a natural uprising. It may be being steered by the Congress.
All right, well, I'll be on the lookout for that when I'm down there. Next up is Greg calling from South Carolina. Greg, welcome to the show.
Yeah, hi, Peter. How are you? Been following you for many years now. Kind of had a little story about my family member here and had a question that precedes that. But it's she's been living in a home now for about 4 years, probably about $330,000 home. Hasn't paid a payment in 4 years, about 4 years ago also, she didn't pay any of her credit card bills, which there's only a 3-year statute of limitations in our state, so they can't go after her for that anymore, so I guess her credit cards have been forgiven. And on top of that, the house, she took the $30,000 to put down on the house here. They went ahead and short-sailed that in Florida and forgave her about $120,000. And now she's kind of in the process of seeing a lawyer about this house here. And she seems to think, I mentioned an article that I saw that was, $5,000 to $20,000 given to homeowners that aren't paying their monthly payments to just leave so they can foreclose or make it a little easier. And I said, well, wouldn't you take $20,000 if they were just going to give you that and you'd leave? And she said, no, I want my house. And she seems to think that they're going to sign the title over to this $330,000 home, and just give her the title for it because they've kind of, not gone through with any mortgage mod, which, like I said, I followed you for.
Well, you're saying she hasn't made a single payment in 4 years.
4 years.
So she's living there for free as it stands right now. So it seems that they're probably going to have to make her a pretty good offer to leave because if she leaves, she's going to have to start paying rent. But I don't think they're just going to sign over the property outright. I mean, there's no chance of that. Why would they do that? I mean, they could sell the property and get something for it. I mean, it's got to be worth $100,000, $150,000. So they're not going to simply give the property to her when they can sell it to somebody. But right now they're living in a state of denial. They probably have that loan on their books. They don't want to foreclose. They don't want to acknowledge the loss. So they sit there and do nothing. And, of course, she gets to live there for free for 4 years and who knows how much longer. I mean, this is going on all around the country. People aren't paying their mortgages. They're not paying their bills. And this is a festering wound beneath the economy. It's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Anyway, hey, thanks for your call. We will be back with the final segment of the Peter Schiff Show coming up, so stick around.
The Peter Schiff Show.
To President Obama, Secretary Geithner, Madam Pelosi, and all of the socialist econ professors across America.
We're sorry. Peter Schiff is back on the air.
And this is Peter Schiff, SchiffRadio.com. It's another weekday in the precious metals market. Never really talked about it earlier in the show, but gold, the ETF GLD, is down about $30 today, the equivalent of $30. Silver back down below 30 at 29.5 on the SLV ETF. And the mining stocks have been beaten up. They really got clobbered yesterday as well. So the Huey Index is all the way back down to about 505. That's well off the 640 record high that index set just in September. On September 9th, the index was at an all-time record high, and we've had a pretty big pullback since then. We're back to the support channel that's been going back through October of 2010. There seems to be a lot of support just around or just beneath that 500 even index in that market. So we've had a lot of profit taking. I would imagine that it's a good buying opportunity not only in the metal but in the mining stocks, some of which have come under a lot of pressure last couple of days. The Dow Jones itself is off about 50 points today, but it's a lot closer to the high end of its range, while the gold stocks are on the low end of the range. Not really sure what is going on with that divergence there. The dollar, though, is in general, now it's positive. It was negative earlier this morning across the board. Maybe there's more concerns coming in to the Eurozone because the euro was above 138 this morning. Now it's back down to just barely above 136, so getting weakness in the euro, and that's translating into weakness in the stock market. Bond markets are relatively flat, though. Not much action there, but we're still holding on to higher levels in yields on both the 10 and the 30-year level. Anyway, let me go back to the phones. On hold right now, special guest Andrew Schiff is calling in to share some words of wisdom with us today. Andy, what's on your mind?
Hey, I got a couple things in my mind. But first of all, the last caller, we're going to be going down to Occupy Wall Street shortly, and anybody who's been down there, I've been down there a couple of times, I really don't think the State Department is involved. I didn't see their fingerprints on it. Maybe if we see Hillary Clinton, in costume disguise, kind of like barking out orders, maybe that'll give us a hint, but I don't think the State Department is involved. Anyway, what I wanted to talk about was two issues here in New York that I think give the whole government stopping employment issue a pretty big kick, and that has to do with the taxi situation here in New York. Now, there are two things going on. First of all, one piece of news I thought was very interesting is that a taxi medallion. Now, in order to operate a taxi in New York City, you have to be sanctioned, get a permit from the government, and they've capped the number of taxis at 13,000. For about 50 or 60 years. Why they're capped at 13,000, I don't really know. But in order to be a yellow cab, you have to have a medallion. Buy a medallion from the government that gives you permission to own.
And this is the city government, though. This is the city of New York.
This is the city government. But what do you think that medallion costs now? There's a record auction happened yesterday for a medallion. They don't come up on the market that often.
Where do they auction them off? Is it an online auction, or is it like somewhere in the city?
No, I think I'm not sure if they're online or not, but one person wants to sell, and they have an auction. It's like a piece of property. What do you think it costs?
I don't know, a couple $100,000?
$1 million. This is the first time $1 million. So if you want to operate a cab, you got to pay $1 million. Now the thing is, these things go up in value, so you pay $1 million. Yeah, maybe you can sell them later on for more than that. But obviously, now the government can never say, okay, we're going to allow more cab drivers in, because then everyone who's already bought a medallion is going to lose money. So they're kind of stuck into this position. Now, I think the whole thing is ridiculous, but the question, there is a somewhat of an argument to be made here, because they can say, look, well, we're limiting the amount of cars to 13,000, and that keeps the streets relatively congestion-free for the rest of the New Yorkers, which there may be a point there. And I think that you let the free market determine how many people want to drive cabs, and determine how much they want to charge. But at least there's a quality of life issue. The other issue is that a week ago, the Justice Department, based upon a pressure from various disabled groups, has filed suit with the city of New York to make all taxis in New York accessible to wheelchairs. Now, right now, only 213,000 cabs are accessible to wheelchairs, and there is a plan where you can call the Taxi Limousine Commission, and they'll send one of those taxis over and pick you up. They're working on a much better routing system that'll be open in 6 months. That'll take that time down. You got to wait, but still, they're going to increase the number of handicapped cabs. Right now, it's only 200 or 300. But the Justice Department said, unless all of these cabs are going to be accessible within 2 months, you've got to take all the cabs off the street. And I'm serious. I'm not making this up.
But then there'd be no taxi cabs for anybody, which I guess that's okay. So what the government is saying is, if handicapped people can't use every cab, then there's no cabs for anybody, including the handicapped people.
Right. Now, Mayor Bloomberg had a press conference today and said, look, if we've got to buy these vans that are handicap accessible, first of all, A, they cost $15,000 more per cab. We've got to replace the entire fleet. B, the rides aren't nearly as comfortable for people that it's a very uncomfortable ride to sit in the very back of a cab, a van. They use more gas, and they're more dangerous to operate than regular cabs.
And they probably take up more space, so it's probably more traffic.
And he says, people in wheelchairs can't even they can't. It's like, you want to hail a cab in New York, you got to go out in the street and put your hand up. You can't go out in the street with a wheelchair. It's dangerous. You don't do it that way. Just let us do it so we can get our own system where you can call a cab. But the Justice Department and a couple of disability groups said, no, this is terrible. The mayor's picking on disabled people. He doesn't know what it's like to be in a wheelchair. We applaud this action. So there's going to be a ruling on this in November, because the government has asked for this, the Justice Department, and it's up to a judge. Hopefully the judge sees reason. But obviously it's going to make traveling by cab much more expensive.
It already is. And the problem is, too, there are a lot of illegal gypsy cabs that operate now. And you could argue that there's more traffic in New York because of the high cost of these medallions. If taxis were less expensive and more numerous, maybe fewer people would actually be driving around in the city, because there'd be more cabs and less other commercial vehicles. But yeah, now here, plus now you have the Obama administration coming in and trying to one-up them. But anyway, there's no limit to how much damage the government is willing to inflict on the U.S. economy. Anyway, Andy, thanks for your call. Everybody else, we've come to an end of the program. I will be back again tomorrow here on the Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com, the gold standard in talk radio.